The Dust That Falls from Dreams by Louis de Bernieres, read by David Sibley and Avita J. 1. The Coronation Party. This was the day that Daniel vaulted the wall. Not many weeks previously, the tiny queen had begun to lose her appetite. In Marseille, President Kruger of South Africa, fleeing into exile laden with wealth stolen from his own people, raised the rabble to new frenzies of anti-Britishness, and hotels where British travellers were thought to be staying were besieged. The Queen grew drowsy. She'd never before shown any lapse of energy or attention, but now she nodded off, even at crucial moments. She received a letter from a boy bugler in the Devons, telling her how he had been the one to sound the charge at Wagon Hill, and she managed to reply to it. The Queen travelled from London to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. She loved it there and had long considered it to be her real family home. She had her own little beach with a bathing hut, and there was a miniature house where her children, now scattered across Europe, used to play when Albert was still alive. Across the Solent, she could visit the vast military hospital that she'd set up at Netley, bringing the scarves that she'd like to knit for the wounded soldiers. The Queen found that she could not speak when the Brazilian ambassador came to present his credentials. She was forgetting how to talk. She failed to recognize Lord Roberts when he returned in triumph from South Africa in order to become the new commander-in-chief. He was bewildered and grief-stricken. The Queen performed her last great imperial act and proclaimed the establishment of the Commonwealth of Australia. Her visit to the Riviera was cancelled, and the keeper of the Privy Purse was obliged to pay out £800 in compensation to the Hotel Chimiers. It had been so long since the death of a sovereign that no one knew what to say or how to behave. Lord Salisbury refused to talk about the accession ceremonies because it was too upsetting. The well-to-do cancelled their dinner parties and balls, and the frivolous optimism that had accompanied the arrival of a new century evaporated. It was January, and the dark clouds that wept rain onto the land complemented the mood of the people beneath them. The Queen's relatives and descendants converged on Osborne from all over Europe. In South Africa, the war that was supposed to have been won already was carried on by Botha, Smuts, and De Wet. Money and young men continued to be expended. The British troops were killed mainly by enteric fever. The tiny Queen died. The Lord Mayor of London was informed, and then the rest of the world. Whilst the nation lay stunned, the great argued about what should be done next. Lord Acton announced that King Edward VII could not call himself Edward VII because he was not descended from previous Edwards. Did the Lord Mayor of London count as an ex officio member of the Privy Council? He decided that he did, and gatecrashed it. Who was in charge of the funeral? Was it the Lord Chamberlain or the Duke of Norfolk, even though he was a Catholic? The Duke insisted on his historic right, and the King conceded. Lady Cadogan received an invitation to the interment that was intended for her husband, in which she was requested to come wearing trousers. The Queen's coffin was so minute that it might have been that of a child. King Edward and the Kaiser walked behind it as it was drawn through Cowes. It came across the Solent in a battleship, flanked by the greatest fleet in the world. In London, the route from Victoria Station to Buckingham Palace, then Paddington Station, was blocked solid with mourners hoping to see the great procession of the gun carriage. Behind it rode King Edward, flanked by the Duke of Connaught and Kaiser Wilhelm, followed by the handsome and slim Crown Prince of Germany, the embodiment of hope for his nation, the guarantor of its great future as a beacon of civilization. The Queen's body was laid to rest at Windsor. The grandmother of Europe had gone, and everyone knew as if by instinct that a momentous era had suddenly ended. She left behind railways that ran at 60 miles an hour, with carriages that nowadays had roofs on them. Vast liners crossed the Atlantic in 2 weeks. Bull-baiting had gone, and there was a society for the prevention of cruelty to animals, and another for the prevention of cruelty to children. Swearing had become taboo in polite society, and aristocratic men no longer got so drunk at dinner parties that ladies had to make their escape through the windows. There were now air-rated bread shops and lions' corner houses where one was served by nippies in white frilly aprons. Anybody these days could buy coffee. The River Fleet was no longer an open sewer. Many had electric light, and there was clean water laid on in the working-class districts for half an hour every day except for Sundays, causing an awful elbowing on Saturdays. Motorcars no longer caught fire when you started them up. They had, however, spoiled the evening drive in hansoms through Hyde Park. The cult of respectability had introduced a blessed order into people's lives, and at the same time opened the door for marvellous hypocrisy. Much as the people had loved their tiny queen, there had been something dull about all that respectability, and the grief and stupefaction that had engulfed her subjects was tempered by the anticipation of something that might be more entertaining. The new king was a bon viveur. He loved France rather than Germany. He consorted with actresses. For the last 10 years, in any case, the Victorian age had already been slipping away. Fast girls smoked and wore the most shocking bloomers when they went out on their bicycles. Businesswomen of dubious morality were getting jobs in the city. Saddlers who specialized in side saddles found their orders drying up. Crowds filled the music halls to hear smutty songs rendered by cheeky chappies and saucy doxies. The new king, kept strictly in the dark about state matters during his mother's reign, grew impatient with precedent and forged a new path. He upset everyone at court. He gave the right to organize his coronation to the Catholic Duke of Norfolk and not to the Anglican Lord Chamberlain. There was a long and bitter dispute about whether the lords should be robed, and the decision was changed 4 times. He sent Lord Carrington, a notorious liberal, as his personal envoy to France, Spain, and Portugal. This was the same Lord Carrington who had once, as one of a panel of magistrates that had tried him, scandalously paid the fine of a newly released convict caught sleeping rough when he'd not been able to walk to High Wycombe before darkness fell. The alternative had been several more months in prison, and Carrington had resigned from the bench immediately afterwards, saying that if this was justice, he wanted nothing more to do with it. The king dragged Lord Wolsey from retirement and sent him abroad with sashes and medals to present to foreign potentates, even the Shah of Iran, who thereby became the first Muslim to become a member of the Christian Order of the Garter. He cleared out his mother's immense accumulation of bric-a-brac, updated his plumbing, filled his court with men who were interesting rather than important, and with women who were both interesting and beautiful. In Court Road, Eltham, on 9th of August 1902, Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton McCosh held a coronation party postponed from June. It was to be a kind of elaborate high tea. They borrowed long trestles from several firms of wallpaperers, covered them with beautiful damask cloths, and, at greatly inflated prices, hired enough plain china plates and silver-plated cutlery to see them through the day. The servants set up 2 long tables in the garden to accommodate the buffet, and laid out rugs all over the lawn and in the orchard in order to create a grand déjeuner sur l'herbe. Chairs were brought out of the house for the elderly or stiff of limb. From the kitchen there appeared plates of ham and tongue, elaborate salads in the French style, Normandy cheeses, and fabulous heaps of fresh Kentish strawberries and Devon cream. For the children there was lemonade, and for the adults jugs of potent fruit cup with sprigs of mint floating on the surface. Chilled champagne would be brought out in time for a toast to the king after Mr. McCosh had made his speech. This was the beginning of the age when riches would finally come to count as much as rank. Court Road consisted of very large detached houses with substantial gardens at the rear. Most had 2 gateways connected by a small semicircular driveway out in the front, so that carriages could arrive and leave without any awkward manoeuvring. The McCosh entrance and exit had impressive brick pillars, with the grampians set into them in Portland stone. Between them ran a low wall.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?